again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Alumni Chats, a weekly podcast featuring alumni from the Department of Broadcasting and Journalism here at Western Illinois University. My name is Buzz Hoon. I'm the host of the podcast. I'm also the interim dean for the College of Fine Arts and Communication. Today, I'm talking with 2011 graduate, Aarik Woods. Aarik, so good to see you.
Yeah, you as well, Buzz. I have a pleasure to be joining you this morning and looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I don't think I've seen you probably since you walked away from Macomb, Illinois. So welcome from Macomb.
Yeah, I miss sweet home Macomb. Some of the best years of my life down there, no question.
So let's give everybody a life update. What's going on? Where are you at? And then we'll get started on your journey.
So right now where I live is up in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. I actually live in a suburb on the east side called Woodbury. So my wife and my dog, we just bought a house probably about a year and 4 months or so ago. So now we're actually expecting our first child here in a couple of months. So that's awesome. I'm very excited about that. So things are moving pretty quickly right now, but just trying to find childcare, trying to get the nursery all set up and stuff like that. As a first-time parent, I got about 1 billion questions. So just trying to ask anybody for help and suggestions and just trying to take it all in while I can and then try to be prepared as possible for the chaos.
Yeah, well, you'll be great. I'm so happy for you. Yeah. So you're a news producer at the KTSP, is that right?
Yep, it's the ABC TV station here. And so I work the overnight shift. So I work basically pretty much from like 11 to 7 o'clock and 11 at night until 7 in the morning. So we put together the morning show, just kind of, I can go through more of the responsibilities, but yeah, sure. I'm a news producer here. So. Okay,
great. We'll talk more about your responsibilities here in a moment, but I always like to start at the very beginning and talk about what it was like to be a young Aarik Woods. And you are from Fulton, Illinois, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's a real small town. So that's it's probably about, I want to say hour 45 maybe, or 2 hours north of where Macomb is, and a little bit, probably about half an hour north of where the Quad Cities are for some perspective. And that was, it was a great childhood. I really enjoyed growing up there, but I think once you get out in the world a little bit, you really realize how small it was, because it's 3,800 people in Fulton, Illinois. There's one stoplight, just one like main high school, and not really a whole lot else around it. Clinton, Iowa is right across the river, and that's like a town of 25,000 or so. But you're growing up, it was like if you wanted to even go to a Buffalo Wild Wings, you're going down to the Quad Cities. If you wanted to go to any kind of like minor league hockey game, you were going down to the Quad Cities where the Quad City Mallards were. And so entertainment was a little pretty much make it up as you go or go over to a friend's house. Played a lot of sports growing up. I played football. My dad was a football coach growing up too. And so I went with him to a lot of practices when I was younger. And then of course, when I was able to start playing on my own, I was doing that. I played, like I said, baseball, basketball, and you're doing a lot of traveling for like summer competitions and that sort of stuff. But we had a pretty mellow, calm childhood, I would say, for the most part. I don't know if my parents would agree with that necessarily, but it was just a typical, I would say, Midwestern boy growing up playing sports and enjoying the outdoors, and graduated my class Fulton High School. My graduating class was 88. So wow. Very small compared to some of the people that I would end up going to school with. And that was a little bit eye-opening, but to me, that was kind of all I really knew. So 88 may have felt, I guess, a little big to me, but I think as I even got to being like a junior or senior in high school, I was like, okay, well, now I look around, I know everybody in school, student-wise. I know probably most of their parents. I know like everybody else for the most part around town, which is good and bad, but it was definitely a unique experience, especially, like I said, when I got to Western and some of the people are graduating with a class of 1,000. They don't even know who they're walking next to at graduation. And I was like, wow, you lived a completely different world than what I grew up in, because you just, almost everybody would have recognized you walking around town or in the hallways at school and stuff. But I mean, I think too, it was a little interesting just because, some of the people that I would end up going to college with, they had school newspapers, they had like TV broadcasts in school. And I know for a fact that like the closest I got to that was my senior year. I did like a little vocational type of class where they would get you out in the community. I went over to the only radio station across the river in Clinton, Iowa, and I ended up doing a couple of weekend shifts there and kind of following. I would do like, you'd go over to there during high school too in class and just spend a little bit of time over there. And that was the first time I had ever really in person seen an audio board with the slides to adjust the volume and all the different inputs. And I think even at that small radio station, I was like, holy cow, this seems like an awful lot of stuff to use. So now I look back on that and I'm like, man, I wish I only had that many buttons and knobs to push. But it's, it was all part of the, growing up in a smaller town. You don't get exposed to that quite so much.
Well, you certainly, when you came here, you held your own. And, I always like to joke that both of my parents grew up around the Illinois River, so that any DNA test would show that I think 50% of me is catfish. So, you have this, long history with the Mississippi River, which is, Fulton's farther south, and now you're up a little bit farther north. Have you ever kind of thought of that you've been in that, so, with associated with the river?
Yeah, I do. It's weird because when I graduated from Western, I went back home for a little bit and I was working, and I would drive across the Mississippi River every day to go to work in Clinton. And then of course I grew up in high school. There was not much in Fulton, so you'd have to go across the river for groceries or any kind of stuff like that. And then I got a job in Eau Claire and I wasn't as close to the Mississippi River, but then I came back down to the Quad Cities. And not only did I cross the Mississippi River every day to go to work for the most part, but I also ended up living in downtown Davenport, probably 3 blocks from the Mississippi River. We'd walk our dog along that trail all the time. And then when I first moved up here to the Twin Cities, I was living in St. Paul, and our apartment, there's like the apartment and one little tiny road and then a trail along the Mississippi River. And I was like, man, it's like, could I just send bottles to my dad and see if he can open them down there, like way downriver or something like that? Because the river where I grew up in Fulton, our house was right on the dike that, blocked the water from coming up over the top and flooding the town. And so it was like, it's crazy how close I've ended up living to the Mississippi River in just different spots and different times in my life. But I mean, it's just so odd that would happen that way. But I mean, I do like, it's something about being able to look over the river and see the sunrise come up, see storms come in. It's always, I think, waterfront property and being able to be close to water has always been somewhat soothing and enjoyable. It's good visuals too. And so, there's lots of events, and it's a good way to notice really the seasons changing too. Because I know when I first was living up in St. Paul, they didn't have really much of a dike system. And so when it floods, like it just flooded the first main road. That's a 4-lane road going right south of, or kind of like east, I guess would be, of downtown. And I mean, when that water rises up, it just inundates the whole road. They just block it off. And I was like, holy cow, there's a lot of flooding going on here. Growing up, I was behind the dike. So even with the water raising, it didn't really bother us a whole lot. But of course, the Quad Cities, anybody who's familiar with that area, Davenport's had all sorts of flooding, and they had a really bad flood a few years ago. I had just left, I think the year before that happened, but I know Redrick Terria, another WIU graduate, he was there covering all that stuff too. And it's just, I mean, the river is peaceful, but it's also a reminder that it's powerful. So nature will give you both, that's for sure.
Yeah. So when you, at some point in high school, and I don't know if you ever came to this realization, but since I met you, Aarik, I always thought that young man could talk. I mean, just like Julio, when he, somebody that I'm sure we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, this young man. So did you have an idea that that's what you wanted to, that's where your talents lied?
Yeah, I mean, I I think at first I really wanted to be more in sports because I had grown up all around games. I mean, my dad
Hmm.
not only coached football in high school, but he was coaching girls basketball and other stuff. My mom, both my sister and I were actually born in January, so that my mom would have time to recover and go play softball in the spring. And so they timed out our births that way. So there's a little fun
Okay.
fact, but yeah, and so I followed sports, but I never really thought that I was like a great enough athlete to be able to like. I didn't seriously think I would be able to play a whole lot at the next level, just because I mean our level of competition was relatively small. Not a lot of D1 athletes that you're playing against, or even D2 or D3. But I enjoyed like going to games, watching them, talking about them and stuff, and so I can remember way back, even one of my good friends from high school, Quinn, was playing video games. And one time I just started like broadcasting it and like just like he's playing an NCAA video football game and like he's playing and I'm just doing the color commentary and the play by play watching him play. And we kind of laughed about it afterwards, but I was like, see, like that's fun. Like I could just make it up on the fly. And I think it's interesting because then when I went to Western, I think one of the first things I tried to do was play by play. And I remember you're like, hey, we've got some tape from Macomb High School, last season. I just want you to see how you do it. And that was kind of my tryout. And I was like, this is my tryout? Like, this is awesome because this is like right in my wheelhouse. And so I don't know. It's just something that like I said, I've always enjoyed. And then getting into news was like a whole different thing. We can kind of talk about that more. But I mean, it's just, I don't know. I've enjoyed reading growing up, and so I mean I'm not the greatest public speaker in the world by any means. I wouldn't want to give like a speech where there was a huge crowd in front of me. I think that's definitely not my strong point. But as long as it's like where it's broadcasting, I can't see the crowd, even if there's a bunch of people watching or there's nobody. It feels like there's less pressure when there's not a crowd right in front of you, sort of thing. So
Right. Right.
I don't really I kind of took like it like a duck to water, I guess, but like broadcasting games and talking about that kind of thing was kind of like second nature. It just became that way for me.
So I do remember you doing Macomb High football and getting started right away, and other things that you remember. You must have been working with the dog, and what else do you remember from your early days at WIU?
Oh man, well, I think the first time I had never met Julio, who I heard you mention there a little bit ago, but I never met him before, and he was from a west side of Chicago suburb, and having never met him, didn't live in the dorm at all. We got kind of paired up to do Macomb High games, and so like I think I met him in a parking lot at Macomb. Sorry, I had something pop up here, but anyway, I had somebody. We met up in a parking lot, and just kind of I think I had picked up the gear and just met him there, and we decided like, hey, like give this a shot, and so it fell together so smoothly, and I think
Wow.
that's what you're always hoping for. But I mean, we probably were just too young to not know how it was supposed to be done any worse or better, and so we just kind of got up there, and um, I think her name is like Liz Nolte, I want to say now, but she was
Yeah.
she was there.
Liz Bales. Yeah.
Yeah, Liz Bales was shooting camera, I think, for us at that time, and we you may have come out, or maybe it was somebody else at first, just to make sure we were getting
Yeah. I
everything
remember
set
coming
up.
out to see you guys. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had to, it was kind of a little bit of learning on the fly, but I think once we felt comfortable, maybe even by the end of the first drive or two, it just felt like it was like, okay, we're in a rhythm here, and we're still getting to know a lot of the players' names, and you kind of learn more about them the more you play, as you do with anything else. And so, that was something that by the end of that, I think even by the end of like the second or third game, like Julio and I had a really good bond, even just off, away from broadcasting. And part of it was broadcasting helped us kind of come together that way.
Yeah.
But it was my first real crack at like broadcasting games ever, I think. I mean, I laugh about that, watching my friend from high school play video games. Like, that wasn't being recorded. At least this was being recorded, and it was kind of shown. And so that was my first real experience, and I had an absolute blast doing it. And I think we did it for like a couple of seasons. The people in the press box were super welcoming and nice. I always loved the people in Macomb. They seemed like genuinely happy to have people there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, like Macomb is bigger, obviously, than where I went to school, but it's certainly not like your Class A, like massive school. And so it was just great because we'd be able to go out to practices then. I remember we started going, there was their coach, Kelly Sears, was the head coach at the time there for the longest time. And he was awesome. He would answer any questions we had. And, they just kind of made it really feel like it was a home away from home when we're already, trying to also learn about life away from our parents' house for the first time. So that was a lot of fun. And I think, just from there, then I was like, okay, well, I could try other stuff. So I think started trying out for basketball and baseball and stuff like that. And I think eventually I wound up doing some volleyball in there too. And so, but I had an interest in sports, and whether I worked with Julio or whether I worked with Kyle Schasberger, I had a whole bunch of different sports to cover and learn, which I was learning a little bit about, but I was also learning like, okay, how do I work with different people? And also like, how do I go about really providing something of interest to the fans instead of just like the basics? I started, doing play-by-play. It's you're just kind of trying to paint a picture, and so you can hone those skills. But then I think as you get a little bit more comfortable with that, meeting with coaches, talking to the players, and kind of getting an insight of what they're thinking about. And so then I was doing more color commentary as well, a little bit older when I was at WIU, and I was just thinking like, okay, how can I add some of this? And I think that really helped me, I guess, as far as not only just describing the action on the field, but really giving people a way to connect to the athletes they were seeing, in addition to just getting, the actual visuals provided to them. So,
yeah, you're learning how to be a storyteller.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Kyle as well, so Julio and Kyle and you, some great students, some great broadcasters, but did you ever feel sort of this also, this competition, because you guys had tryout for these positions?
It was, but I think it was a friendly competition, so to speak. We were all happy for each other, because I think like when you're trying to work as a team, if somebody else succeeds, it doesn't necessarily mean you fail. It just means like they've done a really good job. And so it does kind of, I guess, put pressure on you to perform better. But I don't think it's a negative pressure. I think it's a positive pressure. And so like, and sometimes we couldn't both travel. I remember there was a time where like Kyle, I think, was traveling with, I don't know if it was basketball, was playing in like a preseason tournament down in like Cancun, and they could only take like one person. I was like, oh man, like Cancun sounds awesome, but also like you deserve to go. Like I listened to him on the radio and he was awesome at it. And I was fortunate enough to work with him on a lot of different road trips. So we got to, learn how to travel with teams and see places I would have never otherwise seen. And, but I think that made us all better. I think just, being inspired and having somebody to look at and say like, wow, like that guy's upped his game and he's got all these notes and he knows all these background stories. And so it's like, I want to be a part of that. So then, I would go to the practices too, and we'd both be going to practices, doing interviews, studying the players, studying the upcoming opponents, learning, even like the small stuff, whether it's injuries, suspensions, this and that, to kind of like get a feel so that when you go into the game, it's almost like second nature because you're so familiar with the program, the opponent, the venues, that kind of stuff. And I think it definitely made us all better, because I know Julio now is working with the Windy City Bulls, and Kyle is doing a great job with the stuff that he's doing. I think, where is he at? South Carolina now, or is
and he's doing all kinds of either he's doing radio play-by-play, he's doing some other stuff. It's the strength of our program was the ability of our announcers, and I remember And that's why, as a producer, I always think, it's odd that you were always an announcer for me. I mean, during, I think what do you remember of producing? Did you do any producing while you were here?
Very little. I would say
Okay.
probably about that much. And I
All
wish
right.
I had done more, but I think I when I got up, I did an internship at the station that I eventually got my first job at in Eau Claire. And at that time, I had a guy by the name of Gary Davis who was in my one of my classes. I don't know if it was with you or something, but it was another broadcasting class. And he had said he had done an internship, and it was shooting sports up at this small station in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. So WQOW. So I went up there and I reached out to them and I was like, hey, do you guys have any internship openings? I'd like to, try to spread my wings, so to speak, and get away from my comfort zone again, kind of like what I did coming down to Western Illinois University, and try to do an internship over the summer away from home so I can kind of gain more knowledge about living by myself away from home, and also like get real experience in a TV setting, like shooting games. And because I did a lot of announcing and I shot some, but I don't think I really shot as many games when I was at Western. And so like that gave me an opportunity to get my feet wet in like shooting and editing and cutting video more or less. Because when I came back from that internship, I was like, I just remember looking around and thinking like, wow, there's like maybe 2 or 3 people in the sports department there, but the news department had a lot more people. And I just thought, okay, well, like more people, there's more job opportunities. So I loved sports and I still love sports, but I came back from that internship and I was like, I probably should like try to diversify a little bit just so that I have as many opportunities as possible. And I think then my senior year, I upped it as much as I could do. I was doing like some sports anchoring, some news anchoring, some reporting for our daily newscasts. But then, you were always encouraging people to try other things as well. And so I was like, oh man, but I'm having so much fun doing the sports. And so I tried to do directing. I was terrible at that. And then I tried to do producing and I did decent. I think I was decent at it. But it was just something I had only done so little of that, like, I think if I had more time, maybe I would have gotten into it more. And if I had more experience with like how it all comes together. And, it was good to understand that that's what the producer does. Cause I think, for the most part, you don't really even think about what a producer does. They're not the person you see on camera. So a lot of the times it's like hard to really get a grip for what they do. But I do remember producing a few newscasts and just thinking like, wow, like there's a lot of work here, because it's like you're in charge of the whole show instead of just one story or one segment. And so I think probably in college I was a little overwhelmed by how much you had to do. But I did do a little bit, not a lot.
Well, that's good, and that's a good lesson for, I think, any student, that is, because I think you could have taken the easy path, which was to continue doing what you were good at, but you wanted to diversify your skills. And I'm sure Roger Sadler was somebody that helped you. I'm trying to think who was in charge of the newscast. Was that Roger or Sam? Was Sharon involved?
Well, I think it was probably Roger for the most part. I know Dan Klaus was there a little bit too, and he was helping us out.
Okay.
But Roger was a key. And he would definitely push us and encourage us to try to do, as close to like a real newscast as we possibly could. Like we'd try to go out and get, whether it was just community developments or any sort of breaking news. We didn't have a ton while I was there, but I know that I saw when there was, whether it was bomb threats or something going on, like I actually was just watching WIU's Facebook news, WIU TV3's news feed for Facebook and Twitter and all that, because they were posting updates. Now, when I was there, we didn't have that, thank goodness. And you never want to have that, but it was great practice, I'm sure, for those students. And so like, when we were there, I remember there was a big remodel of one of the buildings there. And I rather than just shoot video, I think it was Roger was like, well, you should try to like talk to some people. And he would always make us go to like city council meetings too, and like cover things like you do now in news, where like big things come out of like city council meetings. It doesn't sound interesting, but it is what you make it. And so like if you're able to go talk to a city council member and get some insight, or, whether it's breaking the story, or I think back to that hall renovation, just kind of like, oh, they're remodeling it, and you look at it and just kind of walk by. But I remember talking to like one of the engineers, and he was explaining about how, the elevator they were putting in increases handicap accessibility for the whole building. And it was an older building, they didn't have that. And so like, when you take that aspect of it and think, okay, well, like now this opens the doors to tons more students, and you can kind of learn about the story a little bit beyond just looking at it from the outside. It made it gave it a lot more gravity to me. And so I think then I was like, wow, like sometimes you don't realize there's so many stories out there to be had, because it's easy to just walk by something and not think a whole lot about it. But I think that kind of helped me too, because I eventually wound up being a reporter and stuff, is just kind of keeping your eyes open to what's happening around you. If you see changes, ask questions, because I mean, sometimes there's a lot of good stories that are just buried there waiting, but you got to do a little bit of digging to get it. So,
well, you're kind of talking about how you're training your brain in a different way. It's very interesting. I want to, before we get into your career, I want to talk about, if you, and test your memory here, Aarik, a favorite memory from Third Floor Salee, and maybe a favorite memory of just Macomb or WIU just being out.
Oh man, man, I don't know if I have like one single favorite memory of Salee. I just think like the bonds that we had there while we were working on the newscast, while we were working on different projects. Like I remember even sometimes submitting, like trying to put together tapes for awards that they would hand out. And like I was fortunate enough to win, I think, best play-by-play a year, or like color commentary a year or two. And like, I'm asking basically what would be my competition, like, hey, like I'm trying to, you think this sounds good? Is this better? Should I include this? Like, how long do I make this clip? And like, like we had talked about, it's like that's competition, but it's also like it's a drive to make everybody better. And like that wasn't something that was necessarily part of class. Like that was just something I wanted to get an award, and I think so did so many other people. And so like, I think we had like 3 or 4 edit bays maybe at that time, and it was like you'd walk out and you'd hear somebody else cutting something, and they'd ask you a question. I'd pop in there and see what I thought, see if we could edit it a little bit differently, and then I'd say, okay, now that you're done with that, like, do you know how to transfer this file over to here? And can I get this onto this? And do you think I should cut stuff? So I don't know. I just think the camaraderie when I was there was so good. And there's so many people to give credit for that. I mean, not only the professors, but the students. I mean, even the staff that probably don't get enough credit. I mean, Tom Durso was very helpful to me, because again, in high school, I didn't really have any exposure to the electronics or a lot of the equipment and stuff. And I love Tom Durso. He had like this long flowing hair. He looked like he would be like a drummer or something like that for a rock band. But he knew how to fix stuff in an instant. And like, you'd go in there and I'm like, hey, like this kind of fell off or this and that. And like, he'd crack a joke and then he'd fix it. And then we'd be on our way, and he'd be telling you, why don't they do this or that? And so you kind of take some, some advice from everybody. And it just like, I kind of just soaked it up like a sponge. And so I guess that was kind of, I didn't have like one specific favorite memory, but it just like, when I look back on that time and think, man, like sometimes I feel like it's so rare to get everybody kind of like excited and happy to better themselves. But I really felt like that was the case when I was there, because everybody was learning so much at the same time. And there's always going to be time to go to the bars or house parties and stuff like that. But we got after it a fair amount. I will say, like, we tried to push each other, and we were trying to get better on a routine basis. So I that was kind of my favorite memory. And I don't remember, I guess as far as just in Macomb in general, boy, I don't know. Part of what I liked, I guess, about Macomb and Western Illinois is really like the fact that it felt big at first, but then I also knew that it felt small, because I actually went to Northern Illinois University too on a visit, and their campus was huge. It's in DeKalb, so it was a much bigger city. And I think from where I was at, like growing up in a small town, I I wanted to get to a bigger area, but I didn't want it to be in so big, even though DeKalb, you ask Julio and Kyle, they'll tell you DeKalb is tiny compared to where they're from. But like, I from a town of 3,800, like I love that Macomb felt like, if I wanted to go to the Macomb Bomber game to shoot video and stuff like that, it was a 10-minute drive, from almost anywhere on campus. And like, I'd have classes, and I think going into freshman orientation, I told my dad, like, I don't know how I'm going to make it from Salee up on the hill down to, I can't even remember the names of some of the buildings that are closer to like Thompson and what was Higgins and that kind of thing. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to make it there in 10 minutes because I was stressed. And then I'm like, okay, well, I made that. It was probably about a week or two. And I was like, actually, I've got time to make it. So that was kind of funny, but I don't know. It just felt like homey to me. And so like, that was something that, man, when I went to Northern Illinois and I was like, geez, this seems overwhelming. Like there's just so many more buildings and there's so much more going on. And so I felt like, it's almost a distraction. Whereas like here at Western, you'd go and like you'd easily walk, to all the buildings on campus probably within like 10 or 15 minutes. But yet there's a whole bunch of different stuff going on, and you'd walk by, you'd go through the union, you'd see people you hadn't seen before, but you'd also see like faces you recognize from, having underclassmen general ed courses with them, or whether you'd see them out on a weekend or something like that. And so it was a great mix of like big enough to get lost, I guess, so to speak, if you wanted to, but yet close enough to feel like you were not just swimming in a sea of faces that you didn't recognize anybody. So I think that's really what I took a lot away from Macomb and why I really enjoyed it. I wish I could go back there more, but I keep moving in the wrong direction.
Keep going north. If you go any farther north, you're going to be into another country.
Yeah, I know. I don't know how that keeps happening. I got a little bit closer when I went from Eau Claire down to the Quad Cities, and then I moved back up, I think, even further away. So,
well, let's talk about how you ended up there, because after graduation, you're out there looking for jobs, and one doesn't come right away.
Yeah, no, that was. I graduated in 2011, and I think the job market, generally speaking, wasn't great at that time. But of course, you didn't really know a whole lot. I guess I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to that because like I had just graduated. I'm thinking I'm going to go take the world by, and just run it. And then like you go out there, and I started applying and applying and applying and applying. And I'm like, holy cow, like, can somebody send me a message back? Because, it's like, geez, I remember going back home to live with my dad for a little while. And like, I had to get a job. So I took a job in a factory just for mass producing plastic parts. And so like, it's one of the most monotonous jobs you can have. I mean, there's days where you just make 800 of the same part. It just falls from the machine. You cut off the extra plastic, set it aside, repeat every minute or so for 8 to 12 hours at a time. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe I would go to school and do all this stuff, and then I'm just sitting here like mass, like I could have done that right out of high school if I really want, you know what I mean? So like, but that was tough. But every day I was like, I know I can do this. Like it's just like somebody's got to give me a chance. And so like I try to stay in shape too, so I would go for runs. Like I would just get done with work, go for a run, and I'd have like resume DVDs that you sent out at that time, and like I would just have a stack of burned CDs with resumes on them, and then my actual resume for people that didn't need it emailed or whatever. And like I would just go down to the little tiny post office in town. I'd probably send out 5 or 6 a day to stations, I mean, from California to the East Coast, like up and down, north, south, Texas, Florida, like anywhere, because I was just like, I want to try to get my foot in the door. And so like finally the station that I did an internship with, WQOW in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, had an opening, and it was for an MMJ, like a reporter position, multimedia journalist. And so I applied, and I actually when I was working at that factory, there was somebody I was wrapping up a 12-hour shift, and I got done, and the person after me was kind of going slow, so I was trying to help them. wrap up their boxes that you just put on a pallet. And I took my knife off, and then the tape thing got stuck, and I kind of cut my hand a little bit. But because I had taken my safety glove off, then they had to fire me. So now I not only didn't have a job for the thing I went to school for, but then I got fired from a factory job. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how is this happening? And luckily I had applied to that WQOW position just probably a day or two before that happened. So I was fired, sitting at home, feeling sorry for myself. And finally I got a call from WQOW, and they're like, hey, like, we'd like to take you up on a chance to do an interview. So, you know, I went back up there because what I had done before was more sports, but they had me write a few scripts and just kind of answered a bunch of questions about news and that sort of thing. And then I went back home and found out like a couple of days later that they offered me the job. And I must have just jumped off the couch, Buzz, because I was so jacked after that. I was like, oh my gosh, like, finally. So, you know, I worked in that factory for probably a year, and then it comes to that sort of end, and then to get a job later, it's like, man, looking back, I couldn't imagine it, like how much of a turnaround that was. But man, I just was so grateful at that time. I was like, I'd probably started packing as soon as I got off the phone, because I was like, thank goodness I got a chance to, you know, go and put all that hard work from college to use, you know.
So once you got there and you got your feet underneath you, what do you think that, looking back now, years later, what kind of skills did you think you learned as an MMJ that's probably helped you as a news producer?
Oh, so much. You know, I think just for one, understanding the job, like we don't at KSTP now, there's really not many I don't think there's any MMJs, because really for the most part, we send a photographer out with a reporter, which is great. It's better for safety. You get a higher quality product, but in the smaller markets, you know, like you have to do a lot of MMJing. And so like, you know, just understanding, okay, like it's going to take a little bit of time to get to a place, like set up, shoot the video, do the interviews. Some of it you got to like line up in advance, but sometimes, you know, you go to an event and it's like, I just got to talk to somebody out of the blue that I've never talked to before, and just try to, you know, make a connection with them. And then, you know, try to, you know, people are always somewhat timid to try to do an on-camera interview. And so you learn to just kind of, you know, tips for putting people at ease. So like, you know, starting with the hard question as far as like saying and spelling your first and last name, so you can kind of get, you know, a joke in to ease things off, and, you know, handling the equipment, and also learning deadlines a lot more. I think like, you know, for WIU TV3, we had numerous days to put together projects and this and that, whereas like, and, you know, and that it was at WQOW, it was like, okay, like they expect you to have a story every day, a package and a VOSOD. And so like you do a story and then do a cut down version of it and everything, and learning more about posting to the web as well, so you can get your own story up, because a lot of the times they may only had like one web person when I was there, I think. And so like a lot of the reporters posted their own stuff. But you know, I think work ethic and understanding just like the gear a little bit more, and kind of how to do deadlines, and then, you know, editing was, I had done a fair amount of editing already at Western Illinois, because I was doing some kind of news pieces and stuff. But really, like if you'd look back at those, like, oh man, I had so much to learn, because there's so many ways to incorporate nats. There's so many ways to do lighting better. There's so many ways to do like transitions from shot to shot, like sequences of shots. So instead of just like a bunch of random tight or wide shots, like, you know, you go from a wide shot to a slightly tighter to a tighter. And that, I mean, I did know a little bit of that, I think, from Western Illinois, but it's like when you surround yourself with other, you know, people that are, we had a chief photographer there, and he would put, I mean, there'd be a minute and a half story, and he'd put sometimes, you know, 70 shots in there. And I'm like, holy cow, like you are just peppering shots.
Yeah.
And then you'd watch his story and you're like, wow, I am glued to the TV, because it was so good. Like I mean, he'd have, you know, in a minute and a half story, probably 60, 70 shots. He'd have 15, 20 nat pops. And so like the story, it just sucks you in because it's so well done. And so like, and he had won numerous awards before. And so like, I think just seeing somebody else and being around them and seeing like him pushing himself too, and then, you know, and we would do workshops too and be like, hey, like, watch each other's stories, and we'd watch stories from other markets and be like, here's how you can really pick it up a notch. And so I think I learned so much, not only just like work ethic wise there, but like how to make stories better. And, again, not just telling the surface story, but like finding characters, finding like what we call MOS or man on the street interviews, like finding people that don't really have any connection, that are just kind of reacting to it, whether it's an opinion piece or they're seeing construction that now they can't get to their home, or, it's a massive snowstorm and they're digging out for days, and you find a guy that's been out shoveling his driveway for 45 minutes and he's exhausted. I mean, like, those are all things that, it just, you have to do a little bit trial by fire through experience. And so I think when I was there, I was fortunate enough to be able to do a whole lot of that. I mean, we'd go and get official sound from like the city or whatever, but being able to really develop characters and make the stories more than just, what I would say surface level deep was something I learned a great deal of at WQOW for sure at my first job.
So that helps prepare you for your next step, where you go to the Quad Cities, as we've mentioned. You're an MMJ there. But what I'm interested in is the transition from MMJ to news producer. How did that work in your mind, and how were you confident enough to think that you had the ability to take that on?
Well,
I'm just wondering, it's a bigger role.
Yeah, it is. I think that's kind of a weird story. When I was working at WQAD, I was working as a MMJ, and because that was a job I had done at WQOW, and I came down to Moline, and I was working there, and I was bouncing around. I was kind of doing a little bit of MMJ and a little bit more just like weekend photographer, because I was one of the newer people there. And so I had a little bit of a lead foot, Buzz, I'll be honest with you. So I was going, and then in the Quad Cities, they have these speed trap cameras too. And so like I was in a company vehicle, and I would be going like 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. And I got a couple of those tickets. And then like one other time I got pulled over by somebody kind of out in the middle of nowhere, but I was like racing to and from stories and going way too fast. We got pulled over. And I think, after they had given me so many shots, they're like, yeah, like this isn't working anymore. And so, I mean, I was heartbroken, but at the same time, like I was talking to people, I would go out on weekends, and like some of the people would have a sheet and it would be like 2 or 3 stories. And I'm getting a sheet that has like 8 or 9 stories. And I'm like, okay, we're doing the same job, but I'm like flying from place to place. And so like, I wanted to provide the local content, but sometimes I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to get to 7 or 8 different stories unless I'm like flying. And so like, I just, it was my own fault. Nobody else is driving the vehicle, right? So I mean, it was a tough lesson to learn, but I just, I made numerous mistakes. And so like, then I found myself again out of a job, and I'm like, okay, well, like I just moved back here not too long ago to get that job. And I was like, okay, well, what do I do? Because now I'm unemployed again. I just got let go I got fired from a TV station, and I was like, I don't know what to do. And I had, when you're a reporter, you're kind of putting your stories into whatever, whether it's iNews or whatever the case may be. So you're putting your scripts in there and like the commands, whether it's take BO, take SOT, this and that, but like, you're really only producing one story. And even then it's really not like the full on production of it necessarily, like banners and all that. But I had, like I said, I knew other people just from going out and about to different places on different stories. And when I applied, WHBF, the CBS affiliate in the Quad Cities, had a opening, and I applied there, and it was a producer job, but I figured like, hey, like at least I would be able to stay here where I probably already had a lease set up, and I'm still close to home or whatever the case may be. And they had their news director at the time was a guy by the name of Mike Lopez, who was actually the news director at the NBC station in Eau Claire when I was working at the ABC station in Eau Claire. Okay. So he had seen my work, and he's like, hey, like, I saw your, your resume on our desk, and he's like, we actually just hired for a producer position. He's like, but they had just hired for a reporter position, and he's like, but I got a producer opening coming up, and I'm trying to fill it. He's like, would you have any interest in that? And I was like, yeah, I'd like to try to stay here, but I haven't done much producing other than probably the 5 newscasts that I did at WIU back in the day. So that's my experience. And so, but he was aware of me, and he had known, he'd seen kind of the work that had done. And so at least there was some level of familiarity with me. And like, I think at that point when he was news director, I was probably one of like the main reporter at WQOW before I moved down to the Quad Cities. And then he just happened to get that news director job. So I think he was kind of following me a little bit, but anyway, he offered me the job, and I took it, and I was like, okay, well, like now I've got to learn a whole new skill. And,
Yeah.
I won't lie, it was a little overwhelming because I was like, I'd never really considered like trying to learn a whole lot. Like I didn't job shadow people that were producers at my previous job, but I was fortunate enough to be trained in by a couple of just awesome producers. And, one of them went from the Quad Cities out to Seattle, and then she's now back in Chicago. And another one, I think, has left the industry since then, and she's kind of returned back to where she was originally from on the East Coast. But like when they trained me in, they couldn't have been any more welcoming. And they were just like showing me like how you do, simple things like keyboard shortcuts to make things faster within, whether I think we used iNews at that point, but there's all sorts of different products. The EMPS, Associated Press, makes that. So that's what we use at KSTV, but they're very similar computer programs. I think at WIU we had used News King back in the day, was what it was called. But
News King?
yeah, but they're basically just rundown creation software. And so like, it was a matter of just kind of like getting used to different ones, but it's like a take VO, a take SAW, take the banner, take this. And so like all the stuff that pops up when you're watching the news, there's always cues for the directors to take it. So I was just trying to learn like, okay, how do I put this in faster? And then, how do I trim down scripts to get the important stuff in without, rambling on so much, or what's the newest information, and how do I get that up at the top? How do I build a sense of urgency? So like once I got the basics of it down, then it was more just like fine tuning my craft and learning, how to do it better. And so like I owe a huge debt of gratitude to the people that trained me in as a producer at WHBF. And then, after they moved on or whatever, I started getting into the, better shifts and more of the prime time shows and trying to do those. We would, obviously the Quad Cities is a little bit of a tricky market because you've got Illinois and Iowa, and you've got, Iowa is a huge political ground because it's like the first caucus. So you've got all the presidential candidates going over there. You're trying to track political results from both sides and all these different counties, and all that stuff's going on. And we had, I remember even the presidential election, like how long those nights are. Anybody in news would be able to tell you the same thing. I mean, those nights where you're waiting for the results to come in are just like, sometimes they don't come in till midnight, 1 o'clock, and you're constantly trying to update while putting graphics on the air in real time. And it was a total challenge. But I mean, in some ways it's like, okay, that prepares you for other kinds of breaking news. We were fortunate. I mean, I guess in some ways we didn't have any kind of super crazy stuff that was going on in the Quad Cities, but I remember even the first time we came on the air and there was like some police investigation in downtown Davenport at a park, and we were the first station to have it. And I was like, well, why don't, like, we're hearing it on the scanners, we sent somebody, and then the photographer called back and said, hey, like, there's a lot of police there and they've got like, crime scene tape up and all that stuff. I was like, well, it was probably 10 minutes to showtime. And I was like, I told our anchor, Jim Needleman at the time, I was like, well, why don't we just try to take this and we'll tell them what we know? Like, here's the situation. Like, and I told him, like, you may have to ad lib a little bit, but here's what I can tell you. Like, I know the park, this is the address. Here's about the time that we sent a crew. They just got there. And like, here's a little bit of what we're seeing. And I think we stayed on the shot probably for like a minute and a half. And I might've had 25 seconds scripted or whatever, but our anchor was veteran enough to know. And at that time, like, I just kind of used my intuition, but I was like, this is the most pressing story that we have going on right now. And it's developing right in front of our eyes. And so like I said, I just communicated with him. I told him, like, you might have to ad lib a little bit because like, I've only seen probably like a few seconds of the shot, before we go on air, but we just put up a banner saying like, police investigation and locator Davenport. And he was talking about, you could see the little triangular like crime scene tape things up there. And so we had to kind of ad lib a little bit. But it ended up being a story we'd follow up on the next day and the next couple of days and that sort of thing. And, it's just it's always a learning experience. I mean, you just really can't plan for that kind of stuff. I mean, there's just no way you can. And so and I think so much of that is true in news, no matter what. Going back to Eau Claire one time, I was on my way home from work and there was police on the side of the road randomly in a spot that I wouldn't have expected them to be. And I go over there and like, I parked my car, put my blinkers on, and I was just asking them what was going on. And like, unfortunately, they had pulled the body out of the water in the woods back, like behind there or whatever. And we were the first station to break it. Well, like, we probably don't get that story at all if I don't stop on the side of the road and say like, hey, like what's going on over here? Because like, it's just natural curiosity. But I had driven the road all the time to see cops there was very bizarre to me. So I knew something was weird. And and that's just part of it. And so like we went on the air with it and I sent back a couple of pictures in Eau Claire, but getting back to the Quad Cities, it was like, okay, like here's a chance. Like, do I sit on this and just hope for a press release and wait? Or do we like take action and say like, here, we don't know from police yet what's going on here, but we can tell you there's a scene. And so I think, even if it kind of relates a little bit back to like play by play, it's like you got to tell people what you know. And sometimes you're not going to have all the answers, but like, sometimes there's weird plays that happen and you're waiting for a word from the official, but you can tell what you're seeing. And in that same way, it's like, okay, we don't always get all the answers from police right away. I know even this morning, like you're writing up scripts and you just say like, our photographer was at this location, like this is what we can see so far. And you don't want to be like too graphic or anything with it, but you just kind of paint the picture. We can see that there's crime scene taped up. There's maybe a block or two taped off. This is the location. Here's something nearby so that people who aren't super familiar with the area, if it's like an interstate and something else, then at least people are generally familiar with where it's at. You can say on the city's east side or something. And so that's all stuff you learn over time, is just like, how can I paint a picture and go with what we have rather than waiting until somebody else weighs in on it. And sometimes all you'll get is witness sound or some, sound from people on the street until you wait and hear from others. Sometimes you go to those scenes and they're not really willing to talk. I mean, they get upset. And so you've got to realize when you can't talk to people, and sometimes you've got to cut away or whatever the case may be. It's all a learning process. But I think what you try to do is just give people the information you can so that they are aware of what's happening. And that isn't always easy because, sometimes it's a predetermined event and you have a press release and you can write the whole story up real easily and there's not a whole lot of chaos. And then other times it's like, there might be 3 or 4 different things going on all at the same time. And you've got to try to do it to the best of your ability. So.
Well, Aarik, you must have had some, as we're kind of winding down here in our hours, that you must have had some personal and professional growth for you to end up in the market that you're in and have been nominated for 3 Emmys, and you've won 1. Is that correct?
Yeah, I got the statue here. I'm bringing hardware for Western Illinois University. So that's awesome. But this is my Emmy. Obviously it's a team effort. It's not just, it has my name on it, but it's it has my name on it, but like it's a team effort. And so that was from covering the riots after George Floyd's death. And that was one of the most it's hard for even me to describe it, honestly, because like that was so chaotic for the first few days afterwards. I mean, there was it seemed like whole blocks burning down. We had a helicopter in the air. There's National Guard people rolling in. There was whole strip malls burning down, and there wouldn't even be people responding to it because they were already responding to so many other things. And just to, try to put together a show with that much going on, I was like, holy cow. like we could just be taking live shots all day, honestly. Like it was crazy. And so like, but again, we had a good team that was like, okay, like, here's what I want. Like, we don't want to do too, like, we want to bring people what's happening now. So we just did a quick recap of what had happened overnight. So, people got an idea of where we were at, and then we were taking them live, like breaking show open, like right out of the gate, just like showing them live pictures, like, of all the different stuff. And it was rapidly changing because they'd get a fire out. Okay, well, then we have this helicopter pan over to here. And then we had 2 reporters on the ground, and they've got National Guard troops marching behind. I mean, like, so much of that was like hard to script, but we were just telling, and that's where you got to have a team effort, is like, I'm communicating. And I'd be like, if you were the anchor, I'd be like, hey, Buzz, like, we're going to go to Ashley. She's on the ground, and now she's seeing this. So just stand by, because I'm going to put you in double boxes. You on one side, the reporter on the other, and we're just going to have to toss it to you with what you know. And so, like, that was so chaotic, but again, you can't prepare for it necessarily, that is specific event. But I do think, like, the more you, and just kind of what I was talking about, the more that you learn how to handle these situations as they come up, mostly by experience, then you're a little bit more comfortable with the chaos, I think. And so, there's no way I would have been able to handle that kind of show if I had not had the experiences that I did leading up to it, where it was like, okay, like, we're going to have to really do some thinking on our feet here and try to figure out how best to cover with what we have, knowing that, like, if we go on the air at 6 o'clock, by 6:02, the story might be completely different, because now the National Guard's a complete different. I mean, it's just, there's so much that you can't prepare for, and it's a challenge, but it's something that's also, it can be a thrill if you're up to it and you feel confident in yourself and your teammates. So,
well, and I'm very happy for your success. And one of the things we always try to end on, Aarik, is what kind of recommendations you might have for a young person in college that's trying to find his way like you were.
Yeah, I think I would just tell them to try and do as much as they possibly can. And we had talked about it a little bit, but like, when I did that internship, it took me until my senior year to realize, like, holy cow, I haven't diversified myself enough at all. And I think it's good to go in hoping that, like, yeah, you're going to do one thing or the other, because I was big into sports, but I think, like, a big key is just to try to make yourself as well-rounded as possible. And I think Western Illinois University does a great job of giving you that opportunity, because there are so many different things you can do. Like, you don't have to just do sports. You could try 8 different sports and broadcast. You could be behind the scenes, you could be on camera, you could be a sideline reporter, but you can also do news. You could, so many people went into radio, so many people did commercial production. They've done all sorts of different things, and I love seeing that. But it's just like, you really need to try to make yourself as well-rounded as possible, because that's a time in college where you can learn. And if it doesn't work out, it's like, okay, well, like, what's the harm in that? It's not like if you go to a job and then it doesn't work out and then you're like, okay, well, now I might be unemployed for a while. The nice thing in college is, like, okay, like, you can try something for a semester and then you can go try something else. You could try multiple things within a semester and then try multiple other things for another semester. But I think one lesson I wish I had learned is just to do that sooner. And so I think as much stuff as you can possibly get involved in, you'll only be better for it, because then it'll open your eyes to opportunities you may not have thought existed. And in case you need to do a career pivot or something like that, then you have that opportunity. So.
Well, Aarik, it's been great catching up, and I can't wait to meet your family someday.
Yeah, I'm excited too. The countdown's on. It's probably about 7 weeks till our due date now. So real excited.
Well, thanks again for being on the podcast. And thanks to all of our weekly viewers out there. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast or want to recommend someone, just send me an email. We want to hear from you. We also hope you continue to watch and listen to the podcast, and generally just appreciate everyone's support. So until next week, stay safe, take care, and God bless.